So whitewashing has been in the news a lot lately. Between Tilda Swinton in Doctor Strange and Scarlett Johansson in Ghost in the Shell. At a recent gala in Hollywood, a couple of prominent Asian American actresses were talking about that particular topic. One of our guests, Rebecca Sun of The Hollywood Reporter, was there reporting on that and wrote a story about some of the comments that were made about whitewashing. Also joining us is April Rain of hashtag Oscar So White fame, and also on Twitter at Reign of April. So I wanted to talk to both of you real quick about this idea that CGIing of Scarlett Johansson's features to make them more Asian, which was an alleged thing that happened, was equivalent to blackface. Rebecca, could you please talk a little bit about the genesis of the article and then some of the feedback you've gotten since it went live?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, over the weekend, there was a panel of prominent Chinese American actresses. It was for a Chinese American organization that organized this in Beverly Hills. And, the topic of, the Ghost in the Shell casting controversy came up. During that conversation, Constance Wu brought up the reports that DreamWorks and Paramount had commissioned a visual effects studio to conduct CGI tests to try to alter Scarlett's features to appear more Asian. And she called those tests the practice of blackface. And she said that she was using that term. She was intentionally using that term, the practice of blackface, because it was more evocative than saying yellow face. Our headline initially, through just the way editorial processes work, quoted that particular phrase in the headline in the context of saying that this is Asian American actresses talking about the Scarlett Johansson controversy. There was a ton of pushback, from general people online, but also Constance's people, who contacted us and said, hey, that this headline distorts the meaning of what she said, which was specifically about the tests. It was not about her casting. So these are two different things. She was not denying her use of that term, but it was the application of that. So anyway, if you go online and look at the article now, the headline has been changed to remove that quote from the headline. The story has not been changed, but the reason why we changed the headline was because for an issue that is as nuanced as this, it was just too easy to take everything out of context. That's the complicated backstory behind it.
I appreciate that. I mean, as being at the epicenter of it, being the writer of the article, I appreciate you setting that context. So April, what I want to throw to you is that even if that was the case and the Hollywood Reporter changed the headline, as Rebecca said, they didn't change the story because Constance still said that the process of using, whatever to make Scarlett Johansson look more Asian was blackface is still somewhat problematic, right?
Oh, no, it's completely problematic. It's not somewhat. And the fact that she said that she specifically used blackface, the term, because it was more evocative than yellowface, makes it even worse. So, you apparently think that discussing an issue that has been a significant blight on the African American community in this country for decades, if not centuries, and you want to bring that up to lead the story for your own struggle instead of using a word that actually exists that specifically refers to your struggle is wrong. So if and this is more of what I received in backlash from, to be very honest, the Asian American community and the Latino and Latina community on the night of the Oscars. When Chris Rock did what he did, which was completely inappropriate, not only with the skits, but his dialogue and his monologue as well. But Chris was not, I wasn't consulted, obviously, as one of the writers for his script or anything else that happened that night. And yet, I got pushback from people that I felt that I had been fighting for, in saying very specifically in every single interview that I did that we were talking about all marginalized communities. So the hashtag was not Oscars not black enough, it was Oscars so white, indicating that I was including all races and ethnicities and genders and sexual orientations and the differently abled and indigenous communities, anyone that had been marginalized. And so that night, the hashtag not Your Mule
Mm.
was reinvigorated to discuss the issue of other people of color relying on the Black community to sort of fight their battles, and then waiting for results. And I think Ming-Na Wen expressed that she finally got it, after over a year, that in fact she needs to stand up for herself and her community, or collaborate with us, but she was very vocal on Oscars night, had never once used the Oscar So White hashtag until it was in criticism on Oscars night, and then deleted all of those tweets, and then came back with one tweet about Scarlett Johansson, which she conveniently pinned to her page to get, 9,000 retweets and counting, but only now is ready to take up the banner that I've been holding and requesting help for 16 months now.
Part of my, what I feel like the mission of the Nerds of Color is this kind of solidarity across all marginalized communities. Like what April said, when we criticize the power structure of Hollywood, Asian Americans may be more vocal about Asian Americans, but one of the things that I was so thankful for with AA Iron Fist was the support of the African American community. The Black nerd community on Twitter boosted AA Iron Fist as much as the Asian American, if not more so. Shout out to Rebecca Theodore, Film Fatale NYC, for like really boosting, and Black Girl Nerds for boosting AA Iron Fist. I guess what I envision for these campaigns is the solidarity across all people of color, and it's disheartening when your community kind of doesn't see the forest for the trees.
Right, I agree. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot for a long time, and especially the past 24 hours or so with this fresh wave of controversy. It's a learning process. I can't speak for every Asian. On the one hand, there is sometimes it feels like the Asian community is still in its first steps in terms of becoming a more vocal about representation and fighting this fight. As April said, she's been around for a long time doing this. I don't know if this comes off as an excuse, but many Asians have said, as Ming-Na did in the panel, that a lot of Asians in the community are not used to speaking up. And so there's this enormous sort of wobbly toddler type of approach to it, where you screw up a lot, and I think that me saying this is going to cause a lot of backlash too, because there are a lot of Asians and Asian Americans out there who have been very vocal and have been for a very long time on fighting on all fronts. Sometimes, when something happens that's sort of offensive against Asians, people will say, well, this would have never happened if it was Black people, right? And I cringe every time that equivalence is made. But at the same time, I think that it's not always apparent to everybody, because there are some people for whom a racist joke against Asians, or a case of whitewashing an Asian character or yellowface is as obviously offensive as blackface, or a joke against someone of any other race. And then there are also people for whom that kind of thing is just never going to seem offensive at all, right? And so I think when the intention of people like Constance, when they make that equivalence of think of it as if this was blackface, is to speak to that middle group. There were people who have never heard of the term yellowface. Honestly, they exist. And so then, as sort of this unfortunate shortcut, there is this borrowing of Black pain without realizing that you're hurting the Black community when you do that. For me, this was a fresh awareness, of realizing, whoa, it was something that I hadn't realized prior to the story, how problematic to what degree. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well enough.
In the past, if something like this happened and there wasn't this immediate pushback to say, let's check yourself, let's look at what this means and how this is hurtful, do you feel like people are listening and saying, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit and think about the language that we use, because there is real pain in the words that we choose to use, whether we intend it or not?
Yeah, I don't even know, I mean, I'm not exactly sure, so you don't feel that you have a voice, or you feel shame or reluctance to speak out, to use Rebecca's words, but when you do, it's to crap all over the Black community and the work that I've done. So, you know,
Right,
so
right.
you could have kept that. You know, if that's how you want to come out the gate, then already we're going to have an issue. You know, Constance specifically used the term blackface, regardless of what she was referring to. She said blackface and specifically said she used it because she thought it would be more evocative. In other words, from my understanding, she thought that it would get more hits. It would be, you know, that it would call attention to the issue more. But at the same time, on Twitter, she says she's not using someone else's struggle to promote mine. That's an exact quote. You know, and those two things are completely at odds with each other,
Mm.
because if you're using the struggle of Black people and what we've had to deal with blackface, because you think it's more evocative than using a word like yellowface, which is easily, the definition is easily found on Google, or even if you don't want to, you know, to click in.
Or particularly that yellowface is an actual practice in Hollywood that
Right.
from the beginning of the moving picture when people would tape their eyelids back or whatever that
Of course, you know, you had John Wayne playing an Asian,
Genghis Khan.
right? You know, so it's been around for a really long time, and those who are particularly interested, I think, in entertainment, and are following the story and, you know, the resulting controversy, know what that term means. You know, and so if you're dealing with someone who has never heard that word, then you really need to start with baby steps, and, you know, and go back and talk about the whitewashing of hundreds of years of movies. Where we are today, you know, I think that I understand that the learning curve is steep, but then perhaps it makes more sense to step back and maybe step,
Mm.
you know, and do your learning in a safe space where you're not going to get immediate pushback, and reach out. It's not as if, you know, I'm here. You know, I am easily able to be found on Google or on Twitter or what have you, and I have added Ming Na specifically, and she has never responded, never reached out, never said, you know, thanks for what you do, or how can I help, or, you know, this interests me, nothing like that. So if you feel like you are starting in your infancy, or, you know, you're in your terrible twos but are trying to learn, reach out to people that have been doing this for a little bit longer, you know, and let's work together. You know, if the goal is more inclusion of marginalized communities, then, you know, voices standing together are always louder than those standing alone.